Hey everybody, welcome to X-Oriente, the new voice of brotherhood. I am your host, Eric Diamond, and I'm very pleased to welcome our special guest host for the evening, Jason Richards of the Masonic Roundtable. How are you, Jason?
Doing great, Eric.
Thank,
It's good to be here. Thanks so much for having me on.
thank you for coming. So the other Jason, he hates to be called the other white meat, but the other Jason is uh, traveling through Europe, causing all kinds of problems Masonically. We hope. And he'll be back
As one does.
as one does. He'll be back in 2 weeks, and so I've lined up a couple of guest hosts. Tonight, we had a kind of an interesting topic. We wanted to talk a little bit about Masonic Entitlement, which is Jason's idea, your idea, which I think is a really interesting one. And so, what do you mean when we talk about Masonic Entitlement? Tell me more about what you're thinking about.
So, one of the things that folks always come up to me and ask me about when they're asking about Freemasonry, they ask me one of a couple different questions. The first one is, how did it start? And we've got a lot of answers for that. But the other big question outside of what do you all actually do is, well, what do you get out of being a Mason? What are you actually entitled to? What are the benefits? And I was thinking about that in relationship to what we see on social media and my life in Masonry. And I realized that there are certain things that we're entitled to as Masons that we don't necessarily get. And there are certain things that we believe we are entitled to as Masons that have no basis in reality. So that was the genesis of the idea for this show, to come in and say, okay, what do we as Masons, what should we expect to receive from our brothers, and then what do we think we should receive, but actually don't have that right.
Okay, so let's start with what should we be receiving that we're not getting? Like, what do you?
So the first one, for me, and it's a big one, I think, is respect. So especially if you look into what's going on in social media, when we when we go through our degrees, there are certain things that you're not supposed to do to a brother Mason. You're not supposed to speak evil of him, and you're supposed to not quarrel with him physically. You're supposed to make sure you respect his family, and this all boils down to, you can extrapolate it out into the sense that you should really maintain some level of decorum and respect toward your brothers.
Mm-hmm.
And especially on social media, I know X-Oriente has done episodes on social media. The Masonic Roundtable has done 3 or 4 of them. Brotherly respect and mutual respect is a very, very big problem in the fraternity, and it's not something that we get very much from our brothers, at least online.
So is this a phenomenon that you think is related to? I mean, well, it's obviously related to social media, but is it exclusively on social media, or does it bleed over into the lodge room or other other points of other touch points, as to use a marketing phrase?
Oh, it most certainly bleeds over into the entirety of the Masonic experience. We have a big generation gap problem in the fraternity.
Mm-hmm.
You have the older generations, the silent generations, the baby boomers, and then you have the younger Gen Xers, the millennials, and then increasingly Generation Z coming in, and there's a lot of quarreling on how to run lodges. I mean, you look at touch points like the Grand Lodge of Tennessee, Grand Lodge of Arkansas. there's a lot of strife in the fraternity that I think really boils down to just a lack of mutual respect in this brotherhood.
And why do you think that is? And I guess here's my question: do you think that this is a recent thing, or is this something that has always been in the fraternity? I mean, going back to 17 whatever. I mean,
1717-ish.
Yeah.
So you look at the history of the Premier Grand Lodge of England, and you realize that the Grand Lodge of England had a major schism within the first couple decades of its existence, and you have to wonder, okay, why did that happen? Why did the ancients come along and say, oh well, you guys who were here first, we're going to call you the moderns because we think you're making innovations, and we're actually going to call ourselves the ancients instead because we think we're being more true to the actual rituals, etc. And I know I'm bastardizing that the reasons for the schism, but I think mutual respect is very much an issue that ties to the human condition, regardless of whether or not it's men or Masons. We're supposed to be better, but at the same time, you see this major schism within the first 20, 30 years of Masonry's official modern existence, and you have to wonder, have we been dealing with this problem of lack of respect for the past 300 and so years? And I think we have.
My sense of this is that it's worse now, and the reason it's worse now is because as a society we're more divided.
I think we are much more deeply polarized, especially within the last decade. So I would tend to agree with you in that sense, but we have to look back to the age of the American Revolution with the revolutionaries versus the Tories, looking into the even World War I, World War II eras, even the 60s and the 70s and the Vietnam War. We were very divided. Civil rights movement. We were very divided as a society then as well. I don't necessarily think we're more divided as a society now than we were back in the Civil War era or the Civil Rights Movement era. However, with the advent of social media, everybody has a voice and everybody has a right to their own opinion and an ability to express that opinion to whomever they please. And I think the feeding off of social media and the ability to just throw things out there without any sort of factual or logical basis, I think that's gotten us to where we are today, where the lack of respect really is pervasive throughout the fraternity as well as humankind in general.
Yeah, well, I would agree with your assessment of how it is now. Like I think you're right. I think that there is a lack of respect, mutual respect. I think though that this this sort of lack of respect is, I want to say it's relatively recent. So I think that there's a difference to me between having differences with other people, right? So, for example, like the split between the ancients and the moderns, or, the Civil War, North versus South. I mean, even in the Civil War, there are, somewhat apocryphal, but stories of, Northerners and Southerners encountering each other, realizing that they're Masons, and treating them better. Sometimes letting them go, sometimes giving them preferential treatment as a prisoner of war, etc. To the point where Congress authorized the wearing of a Masonic badge for Masons on their uniforms, to let people know that they were Masons, so that they might be treated better. So I think that idea of I think the respect was there. However, people could still have profound differences, I think that there was probably an expectation in years past that as gentlemen, right, we would treat each other with respect even as we differ, right? And that doesn't mean that we don't differ in really profound ways, and could, those differences can be, quite animated and quite nasty at times, right? But I think that what's happening today is that we are able, through technology, to ideologically isolate ourselves into bubbles, right? We're kind of becoming, I think, more tribalized than we ever have been, and I think as a result of that, and technology enables that. I mean, Facebook is now in a,
it's an echo chamber.
It is an echo chamber, and it's an echo chamber that, as we're finding out, is easily manipulable, right? Like you can, and that's something that, I know that at Facebook they're kind of freaking out over. I don't think that they intended this to happen. And as I said in the last episode, there comes a point when you get big enough, like you might have the intention of being good, right? But you get big enough, power corrupts, right? And so
my question for you, Eric, is, I think social media is a great example to use for why the lack of respect is more recent than I mentioned. But one of my questions to you is, do you think it also ties into the recent, I guess, recent lack of intellectualism? We call it anti-intellectualism. The fact of the matter is, increasingly today we're seeing that people just don't have the skills to be able to engage in constructive discourse or constructive arguments again. Do you agree with that? And do you
100%.
That okay?
100% agree. I think that is absolutely true. But I think where that comes from is we've done a really crappy job as a fraternity of kind of defining what it is that we are. And because we're so, I don't know, wishy-washy, namby-pamby, I mean, whatever adjective you want to use about,
sectarian.
It's just we've had a lack of spine in terms of putting a stake in the ground and saying this is what we are and this is what we stand for. And because of that, what we do is we say, well, that's up to each individual, right? And that allows each individual.
Or it changes with each Grand Master who's installed.
Well, that's where it gets.
That's another problem.
That's where it gets really problematic, right? Because then, So what happens is you get a bunch of guys who get together, right? And because of the way a lodge works, right? So the way a lodge works is that people come into the lodge, and they're investigated and they're balloted on, right? And the people who are going to get into that lodge are people that are going to be like you. I mean, if you have somebody who comes in and says, hey, I'm a satanic communist, like good luck getting into a lodge, right? Because even though he may have
a guy I'd want to hang out with.
Well, you might just not at lodge, right? because you get a guy who's different enough from the rest of people, right? And they're going to be they're not going to get into a lodge. So what then happens is you have different lodges that have different conceptions of what Freemasonry is based on themselves. They say, well, for example, if you're in a lodge where everybody's a veteran, right? And you guys hang out all the time and march in the 4th of July parade and honor, you might think that Masonry is there to honor and support veterans of wars, right? Or just, people who've served in the military. Now, that's a noble thing, right? But that's not what Masonry is, right? It's just there are some people who that's their Masonic experience, so that they think that that's the way it should be because that's the way I do it. And then they want to kind of roll that out to everybody, right? So you have all these different pockets of people, all these different tribes within Freemasonry. And because they don't understand what Freemasonry is at its foundation, at its lowest level, right? Everybody thinks it's something different. And so you'll get a Grand Master who thinks, here's a perfect example. So for years, the Scottish Rite in the North has been kind of, their whole thing is like, well, Masonry is about transmitting these certain values, and we did a critique of John McNaughton's book, a while ago. Where,
reclaiming the soul of Freemasonry.
Right, reclaiming the soul, and he has this
more baby boomers. Yeah, that sounds great.
Right, but like that's a situation where you have somebody who has very strong opinions about what they think Masonry is, and they're in a position now to impose that on an entire, appendant body, essentially, right? And so that's when you get Grand Masters who think, well, this is the way Masonry should be, right? Masons should shut up and do what they're told, and so that's when you get situations like, Tennessee, Arkansas, things like that, where, Masonry is Christian, and we should be all Christian, and we should be, following the Bible, because if we don't, right? And so like when somebody comes along and they say, hey, wait a minute, maybe we should not be sectarian and things like that, right? They'll hem and they'll haw, but there's a belief among some people that, well, yeah, but the first Masons were all Christian, so we say it's not Christian, but it's kind of Christian, so there's, right. So there's so people have different ideas. I remember being told stories. This is before I was a Mason, but there was once a Grand Master of Illinois who believed in sort of the European concept of Masonry. And so he issued an edict. This is typically in Illinois, a Grand Master serves for 2 years, but he has to be reelected for that second year. And it's almost a pro forma. Like it almost never, very rarely does it happen where a Grand Master doesn't get reelected. And in this case, this is one of those rare circumstances where this guy was so universally despised that he didn't get a second term. And so what I honestly, I don't know the guy's name. So I'm not only protecting the innocent, I really don't know. But what I was told is that he issued an edict that required men to wear tuxedo to lodge. Now, that's great if you're in Chicago, so there are several lodges in Chicago area where they do meet in tuxedo. They do meet in black tie. But
yeah, Washington, D.C. too.
Yeah. But there are lodges downstate where, like, good luck finding a tuxedo down there. It's just, let alone a guy necessarily owning one if he's not part of a grand body or something like that. It's just that's a different culture. It's funny. I was, I'm a little honored, but they made me a member of the group Texas Freemasons, even though I'm not a Texas Freemason.
Yeah, I'm in there too.
Yeah. So like I'm looking at guys like wearing boots and jeans to lodge, and it's sort of like, okay, but who am I to say, hey, dude, you can't wear boots and jeans to lodge, right? But
works. They're Masonic boots.
Okay, good for that. More power to you. If that gets your butt off your chair and gets you into lodge, I'm good with it. It's just, but at its foundation, I think we've done a really bad job of sort of defining what are the hallmarks of a Mason. So it allows people to be tribal. And you see this a lot in groups like the Widow Sons, where they have very particular ideas about how Masons should behave. And then they get kind of upset when people react to them in a negative way. And they're like,
they get declared clandestine by,
by certain Grand Lodges, or they say, well, it's the inside of a man that counts, not the outside. Well, I mean, here's the thing though. You show up to a lodge in black leather and tattoos, people are going to make judgments, right? And so, and again, this is because we haven't really defined what it is that we are about, so that everybody gets to think whatever they want about what we're about, and then try to impose that on everybody else. And I think that's a big cause for a lot of the lack of respect. Because if like, for example, if it's no secret that I sort of, even though I kind of see myself as a moderate, there are a lot of people who think that I'm a bleeding heart liberal. When there are people in Masonry who feel very comfortable on social media using phrases like libtard in a Masonic forum, right? And it's sort of like, or just, denigrating.
I live to ban those people from the
right?
groups I moderate.
Yeah. So
gives me great joy.
Right. Or just, going off on Muslims because it would never occur to them that there might be Muslims out there who are brothers. And so it allows people to sort of have this fantasy of what they think Masonry is, because we haven't put a stake in the ground and said, this is what Masonry is about.
But can we actually do that? And I think, the big question is, can we actually, outside of looking at the landmarks of Masonry, which are not as immutable and unchangeable as one would like to think they are, can we, in the federated governance structure within which we find ourselves in this fraternity, actually find some cohesive mission statement or vision for the fraternity? I don't necessarily think that we can, given the combination of the federated nature of the governance structure of the fraternity and the fact that a lot of the Grand Lodge officers are in for 1 year and then out. So there's no continuity in leadership to model and enforce change. And then there's no overarching governance structure to enforce that, across the world of Masonry.
Mm-hmm. So when you say "can we," do you mean can we, and is it possible, or can we? Are we allowed to? Do we have permission to?
I'm not even looking at permission at this point. I'm saying, is it possible, even if all of the stars were aligned, would it be possible, given the short terms and the federated governance structure of Freemasonry, is it even possible to be able to set a unified vision and unified, code of conduct for Freemasons?
Unified, probably not, and I'm not sure it should be, right? Like, I don't think we should all march to the same step, but from a cultural perspective, I think it is possible, because I don't think that those things happen top down. I think they happen bottom up. I think if you try to impose, if you try to impose that from the top, it won't work, right? You'll just wind up alienating people. But I think through education and through understanding, like, what it means, like what those Masonic values teach us, and how we're expected to comport ourselves. I think that, yes, it can change. It's just that we have to do a better job. When we talk about Masonic education, typically what we do is we hand our candidates a big bag of tools, and we basically hold up the tool and we say, hey, this is used for, here, like, oh, look, here's some compasses, we use these for blah, blah, blah. Back in the tool bag, oh, here's a square. This square is used for blah, 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 and we don't ever teach people how to, right. We don't ever teach people how to use them in daily life. We don't, because of that, I think that is a lot of those values that remain buried in our ritual and in our lectures, never get surfaced. And so it's kind of like when you have an evangelical preacher who cherry picks Bible verses, who says, hey, God hates this, but it's like, it's funny, but like, like there are people who are very quick to condemn homosexuals because it's biblical, but these people eat pork. which is also
Say
biblical.
Exodus and Leviticus, man. Just, I'll
it's a
take
big
this one and this one
right.
and this one, and we'll just throw the rest out because Jesus came and he supersedes the law.
Right, but it that becomes problematic, right? When you're allowed to cherry pick, right? And the reason that they cherry pick is because at some point somebody said, and I mean I've actually done some research on this when I was a comparative religion teacher. When Christianity kind of made that diversion, there was a big split. Like the Church of Jerusalem was, they believed that you really had to live as a Jew. And the Church of Rome was like, no, because the Church of Rome knew that if they were going to get converts, you had a lot of Roman citizens who liked pork and liked, shellfish. And that was a big part of how they lived. And there were a lot of people who believed in the God of Moses, but, couldn't abide by the barbaric practices like circumcision and stuff like that. So they just said, okay, great. Well, we don't really need to do those, right? The faith will carry it. And ever since then, like we're able to cherry pick. And so Masonry is the same way in the sense that we're able to overlook certain things, certain parts of our obligation, or interpret them in certain ways because we don't ever really delve into it.
No, and that's where I think we get into problems when it comes with when it comes to expecting to receive things that we aren't entitled to, and also the fact that our obligations clearly state there are certain, or clearly allude to the fact that there are certain things like mutual respect that we're entitled to as brethren. One of the things that I see a lot of brethren thinking they're entitled to is free discounted services and Masonic education. So I've been on a little bit of a soapbox on this where I've been saying, okay, so a brother will shell out hundreds, if not thousands of dollars for Masonic merchandise made by someone who's not even a brother. But they will cry foul at spending $20 to go hear somebody speak on Masonry, or spend $50 on a Masonic mentorship course, because in our minds we think, oh, I'm entitled to Masonic education, it should be given to me for free.
Well, it's even worse than that. I mean, I've talked to guys, as a designer myself, I've talked to guys who also design and produce Masonic stuff, aprons and rings and things like that. And there is definitely this expectation that, if it's coming from a Mason, that, that Mason should be required to provide some sort of, special discount or something like that. And so, I look at guys like, Patrick Craddock is a perfect example, right? He runs the Craftsman's Apron and he does amazing, excellent work.
He's incredible.
Yeah. Worth every penny. But this guy is this is his job. This is what he does for a living. This is how he puts food on his table. And so
it's not an expanding market, by the way.
Right. Exactly. Right.
you're just, when you take a look at market share as a whole, you're kind of cutting that down pretty fine. To people who would actually be his target market.
Yeah. And so it's I can only imagine that it must be very, very hard for him, to have people say, well, but I'm a Mason. You should, you're $600 hand painted, hand embroidered apron. You should give it to me for $100 because we're brothers. Right. And so that is it. I mean, I'm sure he finds it offensive. I find it offensive. I mean, I find the idea of that offensive, right?
No, it's awful, and there's nothing anywhere in Masonry that tells us that we should be, materially injuring ourselves for the betterment of our brothers.
Yeah.
We material self-injury is a huge theme in Masonry would actually be a really good show for another show that we do.
Hmm.
Um, Masonry and Masonic teachings specifically say, look, you're supposed to help people out, but it should not be to your own detriment. Even when we talk about trying to save a brother's life, it's not to your own detriment. And the idea that we come in, and this directly stems, by the way, from I think a pervasive lack of respect among brothers. The idea that we say, okay, you know what, you're a Mason, I'm a Mason, that entitles me to getting something at a discount. It's like a couple of years ago, I was on the lodge listserv, and they sent out a note saying, hey, we're trying to get in touch with brother so and so. He hasn't been in the lodge in 10 years, but he owns a snowplow business, and we really need him to plow our lodge. So we'll see if we can contact him and get his services at a discount. No, as a Mason, I expect and I am entitled to good work, so that you're not defrauding me by doing good work. But there's no way, shape, and form that I should be expecting anything at a discount or for free, and I just think that's nuts that anyone would expect that, and it really makes me sad to see how pervasive that is throughout our fraternity today.
Hmm. So that kind of begs an interesting question. So here is a little story. So one year I was headed out to Washington D.C. for Masonic Week, and I was flying United Airlines, and I pull up at the curb, and I go to the curbside check-in, and the what do they call them, sky cap, right? He says, sir, wait, just hold on a second, wait a minute, can you step over here, sir? And I'm thinking, what did I do? Like, I'm freaking out a little bit because I'm got to get on that plane, and and all of a sudden, like, maybe I've been flagged, maybe I look like a terrorist, I don't know, So he's standing there, and he marks my bag, like he puts a little thing on like a bright orange thing on my suitcase that
Ooh,
says,
you got a priority sticker.
special. It's special. And I'm like, oh shit, what's going to happen here? And so he says, sir, follow me. And so he starts weaving me through, walks right up, like bypasses the entire security line, and in those, I didn't have now I have global entry. In those days, I didn't have that, so it was a huge line. He goes right up to the front, flashes his pass, they look at my boarding pass and everything, and they wave me through. He gets me to the front of the security line, and then I'm just bewildered, right? And then we get to the other side, and he says, do you know why you got special treatment today? I said, sir, I have no idea. He says, I like your lapel pin. And then he gave me the Masonic handshake and walked off, right? And I was delighted. I mean, I was so like wow, like I was kind of blown away by that. And like I kind of feel like there are times when that can mean a lot, and it's happened a couple of times to me. I remember once when I was we were moving into a new work. We were moving into a new space, and they had set up cubicles, but they hadn't run power to them. And one of the union guys, who was the electricians who were setting all this stuff up, saw my ring and immediately said, "This guy's a priority. Get his team up first," right? And he just turned to me and he said, "Where do you go to lodge?" Right? And I went, "Okay," like those kinds of things. They're wonderful when they happen, right? But I guess what we're saying here is that we shouldn't expect that.
Yes. The critical fault is in the expectation. Now, there's a difference between expectation and a gift, right? If you are expecting something, is it truly a gift anymore? And it's simply not. So as a brother, like, I will bend over backwards to help out my fellow brethren, and you know leave fun stuff on their desks to pick them up, and things of that nature. Um, but and I my mechanic for my Prius at the dealer is a member of my lodge, and what would I ever go to him and say, hey, remember, we're brothers. I was your master last year. Hey, hook me up. No, that is completely and utterly inappropriate.
Hmm.
And I would even say that in some of these cases, that's putting another brother in jeopardy, and that's bordering on Masonic.
Yeah,
If
it
I'm
certainly
asking, oh, go ahead.
it certainly could be. Yeah, no, I'm just agreeing with you.
Yeah, if I'm asking a brother to do something that could get him in trouble with his vocation. I know folks like Patrick Craddock who own their own businesses and their own services. I know that's a different case, but for someone who's just a cog in the wheel of a bigger organization, uh, imposing upon someone in a way that might endanger their career, their vocation, just because you expect something from them as a Mason, is downright unmasonic.
So is it? So what is reasonable to expect? Right. I mean, I struggle with this, right? Because I feel like, what's the point of having, being part of a brotherhood if there are no benefits to, you know,
What is reasonable to expect? I would say I expect open honesty and good work, because we are entitled to not being defrauded by our brethren.
right.
So if I pay you to do something, if I pay you for a service, I expect that service to be good. I expect you to fulfill it to the best of your ability. It doesn't even have to be, inherently good. It's just as long as you are doing the best that you can, then that's great. Um, and that comes back to the respect thing. I expect, as a Mason, I expect respect, and I expect not to be defrauded.
Hmm.
And those are our two main entitlements and the two main things that we get as Masons. Um,
So
go ahead.
I'm going to differ with you a little bit, right?
Okay.
I think so. I work for Leo Burnett, right? They're a big ad agency, and Leo Burnett himself once said, in a I'm paraphrasing, I'm not quoting, but he said, you know, you don't have to use our clients' products, but you should at least consider them first before you go with a competing product, right? It's just the right thing to do, right? And so
It's
that's
very Royal Arch of you.
well, it's kind of it in the advertising world. There's kind of a, like you know, if I go to a client, you know, like one of my clients is a PC manufacturer, and we use Macs, right? And so it's just, like, out of respect, we just cover up the logo, like put a little cover on it. It's a matter of respect. And I don't think it's unreasonable to kind of treat brethren the same way as I would treat a client. I mean, that's to me, that's a form of respect. So if I need a service and I know a brother provides it, and I know that, he's good, I feel like I have an obligation to at least consider it. Right. I mean, he may not be the right guy for the job, or for, like if I was going to buy a Masonic ring, for example, I would at least want to consider the businesses that are owned by brethren first. And look, maybe they don't have what I want and somebody else does, and that's cool. But I'm at least going to look. I'm at least going to investigate and see if I can, all things being equal, can I give my business to a brother? And I know that's a little bit controversial, especially because we are in some ways a discriminatory organization. But I feel like, put it this way, if I had a brother who was a dentist, I would at least consider going to see my brother before I went to another dentist. You
Well,
know?
it's very much the Buy American mentality.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that. And I think, the way you phrased it, it makes quite a great deal of sense, and it's a mantra I live by as well. But at the same time, I think we're differing in our perspective in a sense that, you're saying that's part of your obligation, and I'm saying, but at the same time, I don't necessarily think that we as brethren should say that we are entitled to having other brethren at least consider our services, before going with others or above others.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a little bit of a nuance there, but I completely agree with your standpoint. It's yeah, we should as brethren at least consider those things that have the potential to make a positive impact in the vocations of our brethren.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. What else? So I wanted to go back to the things that we're entitled to but not getting. And, we talked a little bit about respect. What do you think we can do to provide that?
Oh, I think the more educating we do of fellow brethren, I think the better off we will all be. You really hit the nail on the head early in this episode, Eric, when you said, as Masonic education gets more and more pervasive, we have the ability, from the grassroots level, to try to affect a culture change. And it's really going to have to be, I think, a culture change that turns our fraternal culture into a culture of mutual respect.
Mm-hmm.
And that comes from grassroots initiative and pervasive Masonic education.
I would agree. I also think that, it's interesting. We did a show a few years ago on George Washington's rules for social media, right? And we took George Washington's rules of civility and we sort of cherry picked a few that, he's got a bunch of them that are, don't pick lice off your head, in public kind of things that don't really, they're not really an issue today. But there were a few that I thought were really, really good for social media. Here's a little plug. Mark Tabbert, who is writing a book about George Washington, kind of did a re-editing of his book, Rules of Civility. Yeah, I do too.
So good.
It's really good. And it's called Rules for Freemasons, George Washington's Rules for Freemasons. And I was always struck, like the very first rule, both in Mark's book and in Brother George's book.
By the way, happy birthday to Mark Tabbert.
Oh, is it today's birthday?
It's his birthday.
Oh,
today.
happy birthday,
Yeah.
Mark.
Yeah, we love you, Mark.
Yeah, we love you. Is that every action taken by, I'm paraphrasing here, every action taken by a gentleman should be conducted in consideration of the people who are present, right? Which means that if you're in a room of people that you don't know, use those compasses, be circumspect, right? Before you start going off on Muslims, understand that there might be a Muslim in the room watching, and that includes social media. Before you start talking about how horrible liberals are, there might be a liberal watching and being a part of the room that you're brothers with. And so just be mindful. I think that's the first step to this mutual respect is being mindful that there are people who may be different from you that are here, that are present in the discussion. And when you open your mouth and act like, not you, Jason, but when one opens one's mouth, right? And
you rhetorical.
yeah, the rhetorical you, when one opens one's mouth without regard for the people in the room, that is the essence of what disrespect is, right? That, to me anyway.
I'm trying to I'm trying to decide whether or not I agree with that interpretation. Because for me, I think respect is something that is rather selfless. And when you say, trying to make sure you don't open your mouth without regard for other people in the room, it depends on what your motivation is for not opening your mouth. If you truly care about everybody in the room and their opinions, then I agree with it. However, if it's something out of self preservation or not wanting to look stupid, or have someone rip you apart for your terrible, logical fallacy riddled argument, then I think that's a different thing entirely.
Well, but that all right. Let me refine what it is that I mean by this. What I'm not saying is don't say anything, right? What I'm saying is say it in a way where you're respectful of the people in the room. So, for example, and you know this because you've been on a lot of threads on social media with me. I can be a dog with a bone sometimes in terms of, exposing what I think is sloppy thinking. But I always attack the idea and the stance and the thinking, never the person. Right. And that's, I think that's what I mean by this is like, I can respect somebody and disagree with them. Right. And I think that's sort of the essence of what Masonry is about being able to disagree in a respectful way. Right. Disagreeing without being disagreeable. Right.
Right. No, and that's one thing that I think is so critically lacking in the fraternity today. We've lost the ability to have constructive, positive arguments, where everyone goes away the wiser for it,
Yeah.
without necessarily having their views changed. I think discourse can be positive without the changing of anyone's mind, as long as they go away with their mind a little bit more enlightened afterward.
Yeah. I would completely agree. I think part of the problem with social media, specifically, is this idea of social currency, right? Is that, as soon as somebody endorses what you're saying by liking it or reacting to it with a thumbs up or a heart or something like that.
Dopamine.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. It's a dopamine thing. And people will, and what's really interesting too is that people feel that admitting that they're wrong is somehow admitting weakness, right? In other words, the idea that you would say, "Oh, I didn't realize that. Oh, you've presented this fact to me. I didn't consider that. Let me think about it, or let me, oh, that's something that, or I didn't know that. I take what I said back. You can never go backward, right, on social media, because that's somehow admitting weakness, and that's not masculine, right? So I think that's a big part of why we have such a hard time is that no one can ever admit they're wrong, and no one can ever apologize, right? And I think that it's that machismo that is extremely damaging to the fraternity as a whole, right? It manifests in all kinds of ways. So, for example, I have a brother I love dearly, who he lives in Puerto Rico, and he was like my Masonic mentor, and a little while ago, with the hurricanes there, they were kind of in dire straits, and they raised the call for help, and we did, I think we sent a pallet with a generator and food and all kinds of stuff to him, I think it was difficult for him to ask for that help. I think it was, it's hard to ask for help. But what I said to him at the time was, you've given us a gift, right? The ability for someone, when they give the grand hailing sign, that's a gift that person who needs help is giving every Mason within earshot of that distress call, right? You're now empowered. You're now, ennobled to to do in Masonry the highest good in Masonry. And we don't often get that opportunity. Like those hailing signs come few and far between, right? And so
Agreed.
when someone gives that, that's a gift. And so like I think that as men, we need to we need to really kind of take a look at, and this is a topic for another show. What is it to be a man, and what does that mean in terms of how we comport ourselves? I think Masonry has a very distinct point of view on what it is to be a man. I'm always reminded of there's a Rabbi Hillel, right, who was the rabbi at the time of the building when Zerubbabel was building the second temple. And he has a bunch of sayings, and one of them is, "In a place where there are no men, strive to be a man." Right? I love that. I love that phrase. In a place where there are no men, strive to be a man. And that is, I think Masonry has a definite point of view on what it is to be a man. I don't think, as we said before, I think our Masonic education does a terrible job of understanding what that is and describing it in terms of behavior that people can use every day. And it's interesting. So there's this guy, and I can't remember his name is. I can't remember his name now. But the guy who does the Historical Light podcast,
Alex Powers.
Alex. So Alex, a couple of shows ago, did a show on Ladroit Humane, and I can't remember the guy's name who was the guest, but he had been. I've read some of his books. He was a guy from UGLE who was a pretty prolific author. I think he's written 3 or 4 books, and one of them is like a handbook of Masonry, and he's done one on tracing boards and stuff. And he left UGLE because he felt that the UGLE was moving in the wrong direction in opening up, and sort of he felt that they were abandoning the sort of spiritual aspects of Masonry, and so he essentially defected and became a member of Ladroit Humane. And Julian Rees, thank you.
Yeah.
And it's a really interesting. I urge you to, for people who haven't heard it, I urge you to kind of go listen to it. But he talks about the fact that Ladroit Humane, as we've discussed with Heather Fulton, they allow both men and women into their lodges, and he said. It was a little strange at first, but I kind of got used to it, and now I can't imagine, I can't imagine it differently, in any different way. But there's a I'm trying to remember where I was going with this. There was a definite sort of point of view at what it is to be a man and what it is to be a Mason, and Ladroit Humane is sort of crafting their own sort of vision of what that is. The feminine obediences have, the all female lodges have their view of what it is to be a Mason, and we have ours, and yep. They're all different. But I think the one thing that I think we're not doing very well is taking those ideas and lessons and working tools and teaching people how to comport themselves in everyday life. And I think that's something that we should expect as Masons, and we don't get. What about on the other side? What about the things that we do expect? And I guess my other question is, are there any other things that we expect to get, but shouldn't really expect to get?
The other thing that immediately comes to mind is, and this I think occurs a little bit due to fraternity groupthink. We expect that other Masons' interests and priorities should align to our own. We expect that if there is an organization or a group, if there's an organization or a group that is very, very important to me, I expect my brothers um, to see that as important and prioritize that accordingly as well. More especially if that group is somehow connected to Masonry. The Masonic youth groups immediately spring to mind, and then some of the ladies' organizations like Order of the Amaranth and Order of the Eastern Star immediately spring to mind. Um, that's another thing that I really think that we believe we're entitled to, but actually really has no basis in the ritual and in the obligations of Freemasonry.
So can you give me an example of how that might manifest?
So, uh, back in back about three and a half years ago, we on the Masonic Roundtable we had our episode on youth groups, and it's episode 42. It was an episode that will forever live in infamy. And we went on there, and we kind of shocked the hell out of all of our listeners because we took a very pragmatic approach and basically said, look, show me the business value and the value proposition of youth groups. I don't see them here. But if you can't show me a real value proposition compared with other non-Masonic affiliated youth groups, then these groups simply don't have a right to exist. In the sense that there's nothing in our obligation that says that we should spread ourselves even more thin to support these groups, just because they're Masonic and just because they're important to some of our brothers. So it's I've always taken a very practical approach because I'm very closely connected to one of the Bethels in our area. It's a thriving Bethel, and it's doing really, really great work. And I'm like, okay, you have a concrete value proposition. You are making, real strides in the community, and you are really improving the lives of these young ladies who are part of this Bethel. That's awesome. But in our episode, we essentially said, look, if there's a youth group or some other group in Masonry that's struggling, don't berate your brethren because that group is really important to you and your brethren aren't prioritizing it.
Gotcha. So there's a big one where I think and it kind of speaks to some of the issues that I think Grand Lodges are facing, right? And that's this idea that we expect some kind of Masonic, initiatory experience, right?
Ooh.
Right? We expect, in other words, we expect to get secret knowledge, or we expect to get this kind of experience. And I think that the experience is what we make of it, right? And I think Grand Lodges struggle because they feel like people are not going to come to Masonry unless they get something. So what happens is I think it creates a culture of, I call it consumer Masonry. Sometimes people call it corporate Masonry, but it's not corporate Masonry to me. It's consumer Masonry, right? Where you're treating the petitioner and the candidate and the member like a consumer, and you're saying, well, what does the consumer get, and why should they stick around, right? And to me, that is absolutely wrong. That is the wrong approach to take. What you're giving them is an opportunity to work, right? You're giving them a bunch of tools. You're showing them to the quarry, and you're saying, now go cut a stone, right? And how you cut that stone, right? It might be by creating a website for your lodge. It might be by learning ritual. It might be by, buying your lodge a new Tyler sword, or getting white gloves for everybody, or,
Ask not what your Masonry can do for you.
Yeah. Right. Right. And so what happens is then I think, when Grand Lodges get into that mindset, right? They feel like they have to create programs for lodges, and then they have to kind of force those programs down lodges' throats, right? Because, you know, I keep thinking of the chip programs that, you know, I mean, it's always been
you implant the alien
Right.
microchips into the children,
right. Yeah, that's always been the joke in our lodge. Like, you know, how do they get the chips into the kids? Interestingly, I just watched today an episode of Black Mirror that dealt exactly with that. Like this little girl gets a chip implanted in her brain that allows her mom to see where she's going and what she's doing, and it causes nothing but problems. Right. And I just like, you know, as soon as like she pulls it, you know, the doctor pulls out the needle, I'm like, okay, I just turned to my wife and said, this is not going to end well. But it's programs like that where, you know, the Grand Lodge thinks it's a good thing, and it is a good thing. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it.
I like the child ID program. I'm a big proponent of it.
Yeah. I feel like it doesn't really do very much, but you know, it doesn't hurt. So, you know, but there's, you know, there's this thing where, you know, Grand Lodges can get very heavy handed with, well, you're not with the program. You're not. So we have this thing. They, I don't know if they still do it in Illinois, but they did it for several years, and we were a part of it. It was called the Grand Masters Award for Excellence. Right. And your lodge had to do certain things, like you had to, perform so many degrees with your own people, and you had to do certain charitable works, and you had to attend Grand Lodge, and you had to, you know, like there were all these things that, you know, you got points for, and if you got enough points, you got a special lapel pin, and each year you did it, you got a, you know, everybody gets a little bar, and you know.
Oh, we don't even get the lapel pin.
Oh,
We've got the James Noah Hillman Award in Virginia, and it's the exact same thing, and all you get is like a little bar for your plaque.
Oh yeah.
It's the biggest pain in the butt to get.
Yeah. And I remember like a lot of, you know, and what it did for several masters of my lodge is it gave them sort of a punch list of things to sort of check off throughout the year. And that helped inform some of the programming. So while I think it's a really good, I remember when I was master, I said, we're not going to do that this year because we have other more important things that we have to get done. Like we had a huge backlog of candidates that we had to kind of, you know, had been, some of them had been waiting for years to get their, you know, second degree. And we had to, you know,
and they're still around.
Well, so some of them had actually moved away.
Okay.
And so that was a kind of so there was one guy who got his EA, and then he left for 2 years working in Bahrain. Right. And he was fine with it. He's like, look, I just want to be initiated. He went to Bahrain, he did his thing. He came back and he finished his degrees. Right. There were some guys who were very, traditional, and they didn't, you know, like, you know, we have in Illinois that, I don't know if they do this in Virginia or DC, the Blue Lightnings. Right. It's not quite a 1 day class, but it's almost a 1 day, you know, you basically get your second and third degree in a single day, you know.
We do the 1 day conferrals in Virginia every 3 years. This is our year. Hooray.
Yeah. So we try to avoid them if at all possible. But if one of our guys wants to do it for whatever reason, we don't stop them. Right. If they're doing a Blue Lightning in Downers Grove or something, and our guy wants to go to Downers Grove and get his degrees, we're not going to forbid him from doing it. You know, he's free to do it, and we're, you know, and we don't treat him any differently when he does. Right. But and some guys have a valid reason for doing it. Like, hey, I really want to get my third degree before I go off to the military. Okay, no problem. You know, or I'm moving out of state, or, you know, my dad's really sick and I want to be a Mason. I want to sit with him in lodge before he, you know, passes away. And, you know, like there are reasons to do it, and we're good with it. And so some of them were like that. Some of them just lost interest, and they just, you know, they got their first degree and they were just like, this is not for me, you know, and they just left. But they still remain on our docket because our Grand Lodge is loath to, like, suspend anybody or, remove anybody from, like once you're in, and it's hard to get them out. So,
but they're not paying dues.
Exactly. So and they look at a list like that, and it for me and my lodge, it got a little bit difficult because, I would get calls from the Grand Master saying, why aren't you guys doing a Blue Lightning? And me saying, look, we can't really find anybody who wants to do it. Like they don't want to do a Blue Lightning. I can't force them to do a Blue Lightning, and so we had to do all kinds of things to, mitigate that. Like we did one thing where we did 3 third degrees in their entirety over a weekend, which is, hard, but but
we did 3 in the same day. That's how I got raised.
Yeah. So
painful.
Yeah, so we and our constitution say you can only do 3 guys at a time, right? You can't do more than that. So so it was. I just felt like we had bigger fish to fry than to win the Grandmaster's Award of Excellence, and over the years, that's kind of I don't know. Like I said, I don't even know if they still do it anymore, and it's just not part of our lodge's agenda right now. But I have seen grand bodies do this all the time where they come up with these programs, and then it's sort of the district deputy's job to kind of flog the lodges into complying, into participating. And there's a lot of pressure put on lodges and masters to get with the program, literally, right?
Literally. Yeah.
And so I think that's something that, that's an expectation that we shouldn't have. Like we shouldn't expect to get anything from Masonry that we're not willing to work for. Right. Masonry, as you well know, and pretty much everybody in Masonic podcasting that I've come into contact with, that
we're
it's
not doing this to get rich.
Well, right. But Masonry is, Masonry has a tremendous amount to offer, but it requires work. Like you get that tremendous amount when you work to get it, and then you value it, right? And when you don't, it's not, it's sort of like, is this all there is? And so like
you show up to lodge once a month and, have green beans for dinner, then that's one Masonic experience.
Right.
But is it the one that you actually want?
Right. And so
up to the individual.
And the lodge, right? So
Right.
One of the things that, like I like to tease Pete Norman because he always talks about spaghetti dinners on paper plates, and that's his sort of, code word for bad Masonic experience. That gets laid at the feet of the lodge, right? And it's up to the lodge to work at it to make that experience better. And it's up to the candidates to work at it to make their experience better, as they learn their catechisms, and as they learn ritual and things like that. It becomes, everybody's got a role to play. Everybody's got a job to do. And it's unfair to expect someone else to do that job.
Agreed.
Right. Cool. Well, we're overtime, but I'm all in. I want to thank you, Jason, for being here. It has been truly enlightening as always. And, it's just such a pleasure to spend time with you.
Yeah, likewise, Eric. Our conversations are some of the best I've had with just about anyone. So
Yeah.
Appreciate the chance to come on and shoot the breeze with you and
Absolutely.
let everybody watch.
We will definitely have you back. I want to thank not just you, Jason, but our executive producers for making our show possible. If you'd like to become an executive producer, please visit our Patreon page. It's www.patreon.com/X-Oriente and pledge a donation. And that basically, keeps the software upgraded, keeps the bandwidth on, and allows us to continually improve the show. And then let us know what you think. And also I want to thank the people who are here for live. It looks like there are about 6 people And special thanks to Mike Hambrecht, who's Mike the intern, who's he's just an amazing resource for all Masonic podcasters. But he's a gem. And the people who
That's
showed
why we
up.
took him.
Yeah, it's he's the real deal. But we want to know what you think. Drop us a line at xoriente@gmail.com, or leave a comment on our Facebook page. One thing that I'd like you to give me feedback on specifically is, we stream this show live to Facebook. I'm tracking kind of a bit of a backlash around Facebook and stuff like that. We're able to stream pretty much anywhere. So if you'd like to continue, if you think that we should continue to stream to Facebook, I mean, we upload all the videos to YouTube after the fact, but we could do it the other way. We could stream to YouTube and then upload video to Facebook. So if you have a preference, let us know. Let us know if you would rather attend live for YouTube. YouTube recently has a chat room now, as part of their live streaming thing, and so that might be that might allow for a little bit. One of the reasons that we stream live is because we like to have people commenting. We watch the comments, and sometimes respond to them. So maybe a full-on interactive chat room might be a better solution. So let me know if you're listening to this. Let me know what you think, and drop me a line and just let me know too. Like, how do you normally consume the show? Like, do you watch the video? Do you attend live? Do you listen in your car, on your way to work, or on through your mobile phone, or like how do you consume X-Oriente? I'm just real curious. Would love to know. Drop us a line at xoriente@gmail.com, or leave a comment on the Facebook page, or on our blog at xoriente.com, and let us know. And with that, I thank you all for joining us. Fiat Vox, everybody, and we'll see you next time.